The unexpected arrival, the stars were quiet. In the vast silence of space, the ship floated, almost invisible, against the backdrop of distant galaxies. It was an alien craft, sleek and dark, a vessel of unknown origin. On board, its sole occupant and Fen, observer, sent from another world, stood at the viewing port, staring out into the black expanse. The ship's hum was the only sound as it drifted closer to its target. The observer, an alien with pale blue skin and glowing eyes, was accustomed to visiting planets, watching and studying civilizations. Their mission was simple: watch humanity, record their actions, see if Earth, a planet brimming with potential, was worthy of consideration in the greater galactic community. But Earth, as the observer quickly realized, was not what they had expected. The signals they had intercepted before arriving were disjointed, chaotic, even. The humans were unpredictable, flawed, and disorganized, yet there was a certain energy to them, a fire. The observer's species, who valued logic and structure above all else, had never encountered anything like it. The humans' love for conflict, their stubbornness, their resilience, it was all new to the observer. They didn't understand it, yet they couldn't look away. As the ship drew closer to Earth, the observer's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp beep from their console. A bright light flashed, signaling that Earth's communication systems had detected the ship's approach. It had been over a century since any alien race had visited Earth, and yet humanity's defenses had evolved. The ship's energy readings fluctuated wildly as the planet's technology detected its presence. The observer frowned. They had not expected such a reaction. From the records they had gathered, Earth's technology was still primitive compared to the rest of the galaxy. It was supposed to be an easy observation. But now, the observer was beginning to feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. The human ships moved into formation around the planet's atmosphere, their engines bright against the dark sky. The observer watched in amazement as they moved with an urgency, a sense of purpose that was foreign to the calm of their own world. These humans were not as weak as they had been led to believe. Why do they act this way? The observer muttered to themselves. They know we are here. A flash of light from the planet's surface caught their attention. A missile, launched from Earth's defense systems, shot upward, targeting the observer's ship. It was a direct threat. The observer's heart raced. The missile was not the only response. Humans were preparing for war, and the observer had never expected this. They had come to Earth expecting to find a species to catalog, to assess, not to witness a defense strategy. It was clear that Earth had a history of conflict, but to react so quickly, so aggressively? The observer immediately turned their ship away from the missile's path, sending a command to evade. The missile exploded in the distance, harmlessly, but the message was clear. Earth would not welcome outsiders. At least, not yet. The observer's mind raced as they tried to understand what had just happened. The humans had responded with violence, but there was something more behind it. Fear? Anger? Or was it something else entirely? The alien shifted uneasily, unable to fully comprehend the situation. They had expected to observe, to quietly observe the humans from a distance. But now they were involved. This planet, these people, had they underestimated them? The ship's alarms blared again. Another missile was launched, this time from the surface of the Earth. It was clear that humanity was not simply defending itself, they were fighting back. There was no retreat, no hesitation. The human race had no plans to let any threat from the stars go unnoticed. The observer's heart raced as they attempted to communicate with their homeworld. They needed answers. But as the seconds ticked by, the human missiles kept coming, and Earth's defenses were showing no signs of stopping. This wasn't just a planet of primitive creatures. This was a planet capable of standing up to an enemy far more advanced than them. The observer realized that humanity was not to be underestimated. The observer's entire mission was now in question. The excitement and curiosity about humanity's resilience began to feel more like fear. With a deep breath, the observer turned their attention back to the data console. Earth's atmosphere was rapidly approaching. They had been discovered, and there was no turning back now. The observer would have to land to make contact and learn more. And yet, one question lingered in the observer's mind. What kind of species was this? Humanity's hidden resilience. The observer's ship slowly descended into the atmosphere of Earth, its hull heating as it cut through the thick layers of air. Below, the planet stretched out like a patchwork, quilt forests, cities, oceans vast, and full of life. There was a hum of energy in the air, a pulse that seemed to echo through the observer's ship. They had only just begun to understand the complexity of this world, but one thing was already clear. Earth was far more resilient than they had imagined. The ship touched down quietly on a barren stretch of land, away from human settlements. The observer's heart pounded in their chest. It was time to make contact, to understand the humans who had just threatened their arrival with missiles. Stepping outside the craft, the observer was greeted by an unfamiliar but strangely comforting atmosphere. The air smelled of dirt and fresh grass, and the ground beneath their feet was solid. The sun, although dimmed by the clouds overhead, cast long shadows across the land. It was a quiet moment, but it felt like the calm before a storm, before the chi. Observer could even process what was happening. The ground beneath them shook. The deep rumble of engines grew louder, and a squadron of human vehicles appeared on the horizon. They were military transport vehicles, moving swiftly toward the observer's location. Humans were approaching fast, not in fear, but in a calculated and precise manner. The observer's first instinct was to retreat, but they quickly realized there was no point. The humans had already spotted them, and there was no escaping their gaze. As the vehicles drew closer, a human soldier, clad in heavy armor, stepped out and walked toward the observer with purpose. "Are you the alien scout?" the soldier asked, his voice steady but laced with suspicion. The observer felt an icy chill run through their body. The humans had already made contact, and they weren't backing down. "I am," the observer replied, their voice low but steady. "I come in peace. I've been sent to observe." The soldier's eyes narrowed, clearly assessing the situation. "You come to observe, but you've already shown you're capable of more. We don't take kindly to threats." The observer was stunned. They had only fired their missiles in self-defense, but the human soldier saw it as a preemptive move, a sign of aggression. The observer's mission was at risk of failure before it had even begun. "We didn't mean to harm anyone," the observer said, trying to ease the tension. "Our presence here was only to observe." The soldier's expression softened slightly, but his stance remained firm. "You've come to Earth, but this isn't just a planet to watch. Humans are survivors. We fight when we have to. We won't let anyone take us without a fight." The observer had been trained to understand the history of countless species, but nothing had prepared them for the sheer determination of humanity. Earth wasn't just a planet. It was a battleground, a place where every species, whether human or otherwise, had to fight for survival. Humans, with all their flaws, were capable of rising to the occasion when threatened, as the human soldier spoke. The observer's mind raced. How could a species so young in galactic terms, with no advanced technology compared to the rest of the galaxy, possess such an overwhelming force of will? Their resilience was something the observer had never witnessed before. "I've seen many worlds," the observer said slowly, "but nothing like this." The soldier didn't say anything, but there was a glint in his eyes. He turned his back and gestured for the observer to follow. "You'll see more soon," he said. "There's more to humanity than you can imagine." The Observer followed the soldier and his team toward a nearby military base. It was there that they would witness the full extent of humanity's resilience. But even as they walked, the observer's mind lingered on one thought. What was it about humans that made them so unstoppable? They reached the base, a sprawling facility surrounded by towering walls and hidden behind layers of defenses. Humans were busy, moving with urgency, but not in panic. They were focused. The observer couldn't shake the feeling that they were witnessing something extraordinary. At the center of the base, a large screen displayed a map of Earth. The soldiers gathered around it, watching carefully as information poured in from various global sources. Earth was under threat, not just from the alien forces the humans had encountered, but from other potential dangers as well. Yet, as the observer watched, they realized that the humans had already begun to organize, to prepare for something much larger than they had originally planned for. The human leader, a woman with short-cropped hair and a commanding presence, stood before the screen. She turned to face the soldiers, her expression hard as stone. "We have one chance," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "We must unite. We fight together or we fall. This is our planet. We protect it. We protect each other." The observer's breath caught in their throat. This was no longer a simple observation mission. The humans were ready to fight, not just for survival, but for something deeper, something beyond their own lives. It was as if they had tapped into a power that even the observer could not understand. As the leader turned to issue orders, the observer felt a shift inside them, a growing sense of respect and awe for the human spirit. They had come to observe, but now they found themselves caught in the very heart of a battle they had never anticipated. It was clear now. The humans were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting because it was in their nature to never give up. And that, more than any weapon or technology, was their true strength. The encounter with the Zivak commander, the air in the human base, was thick with tension. The observers stood at the back of the room, their eyes darting from one human to the next. Everyone was in motion, preparing for something huge, something that had been building up since they'd first landed. Earth wasn't just fighting for survival. It was mobilizing for a battle they had no choice but to win. And the observer couldn't help but wonder, how far would they go? Ready the weapons. Set the shields. We move out in 20 minutes. A voice commanded, sharp and unwavering. The woman in charge, the leader the observer had seen earlier, turned away from the map. Her expression was grim, but there was fire in her eyes. The observer had watched from the sidelines for days now, witnessing humanity's preparation for the inevitable. Earth was under attack by a powerful force that the humans had only recently discovered. The Svak Empire, a ruthless and technologically advanced alien race, had declared their intention to conquer Earth. The humans had reacted with all the force they could muster, but the odds were stacked heavily against them. Yet, as the observer watched the humans prepare, they realized something. The humans weren't fighting just for survival anymore. They were fighting for something bigger, something that resonated deep within their very being. These people didn't back down. They didn't cower when faced with overwhelming power. They found strength in their unity, their resolve, and that unity was about to be tested. His vague fleet had arrived. Thousands of ships, dark and menacing, hung in the sky like vultures, waiting for the moment to strike. They had come to invade, to dominate. The Zivak believed themselves to be the superior race, and they had never encountered a species like humanity before. They had underestimated Earth, and they were about to learn just how big a mistake that was. The human leader, whom the observer had come to know as Captain Elina Stone, stood at the front of the war room. She stared at the holographic map, fingers tapping the table in quick, rhythmic movements. "We can't afford to lose. This is it, people. Earth's survival is on the line," she said, her voice low but filled with determination. "We fight like we've never fought before." The observer couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Captain Stone's confidence was contagious, and for the first time since their arrival, the observer felt something unfamiliar hope. The humans might be outmatched in technology and firepower, but they had something the Zvak lacked: a fierce will to protect their home. The doors of the war room opened, and a group of humans, dressed in combat gear, marched in. Among them was a man with short, black hair and a scar running across his cheek. His eyes were cold and calculating, a soldier who had seen his fair share of battle. His name was Lieutenant James Carter, and he was the leader of the human ground forces. "Lieutenant Carter reporting," he said, his voice firm. "The Zvak are preparing to launch their first wave. They're coming in fast." "We'll hold the line," Captain Stone said without hesitation. "Prepare for launch. We're going to meet them head on." The observer watched in silence as the humans quickly moved to their positions. They didn't hesitate. They didn't falter. They moved as one, each person knowing their role, each one understanding that the fate of the planet rested on their shoulders. The observer couldn't help but admire their discipline. It was unlike anything they had seen before in any species. As the human forces mobilized, the observer was led to a platform overlooking the base's command center. From there, they could see the vast array of human ships, their engines firing up as they prepared for battle. The air was thick with the hum of energy, the vibration of hundreds of weapons powering up. The observer felt a shift in the atmosphere. The humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to protect everything they had ever built. Earth wasn't just a planet to them. It was home. Minutes passed, but to the observer, it felt like hours. The ground began to tremble beneath their feet as the first wave of Zvak ships descended from the sky, their dark forms blotting out the stars. The Zvak commander, a massive alien whose very presence radiated power, led the charge. He had a reputation ruthless, unyielding. His name was Commander Vokar, and his goal was simple: conquer and destroy. Commander Vokar's ship hovered above the battlefield, its immense size casting a shadow over the human forces. From the ground, the humans could only look up and prepare themselves for the oncoming storm. But the observer wasn't afraid. They had seen countless species flee in fear when confronted with overwhelming odds. But the humans? They stood tall, their resolve unwavering. The observer had spent their entire life studying other races, but they had never seen anything quite like this. As the battle began, the observer's eyes never left Captain Stone. Her face was a picture of calm determination. She gave no orders, made no pleas. She simply turned to face her soldiers, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders, and then, with a single command, she led them into battle. The first Zvak ship was taken down by human fire, and the observer watched as the humans fought with all they had. Their weapons, though primitive, compared to the Zvak's advanced technology, were effective, their strategy impeccable. The human forces worked in perfect synchrony, their movements coordinated, every soldier playing their part. Commander Vokar's face twisted in fury as his ships began to fall. He had underestimated Earth. He had underestimated humanity. And, as the Zvak fleet began to retreat, the observer couldn't help but wonder, could this small, seemingly insignificant species truly stand against a force as powerful as the Zvak Empire? For the first time since they had arrived on Earth, the observer realized that perhaps humanity's true strength was not in their weapons, but in their unwavering belief in their ability to protect what mattered most. The fight for Earth had only just begun. Betrayal and new alliances, the dust of battle settled slowly over Earth's surface. The Zvak fleet, once a terrifying force that loomed over humanity like an unstoppable storm, had begun to retreat, but only for the moment. The damage done to their fleet was significant, yet Commander Vokar's arrogance would not let him accept defeat easily. He had underestimated humanity, but that was a mistake he would not repeat in the aftermath of the battle. The observer stood in the war room once again, watching as human forces regrouped and began to assess their losses. The humans had won a significant victory, but the price was high. Many ships had been destroyed, and the ground forces had suffered casualties. Yet there was no time for mourning. Earth was far from safe. Captain Elena Stone, her uniform stained with the remnants of battle, stood in front of the holographic map, scanning the incoming data. She was exhausted, but there was no sign of weakness in her posture. The observer couldn't help but feel admiration for her resilience. "We won this round, but the Zvak are far from done," Captain Stone said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of leadership. "We need to prepare for their retaliation, and we need to do it quickly." The observer watched in silence, still processing the events that had unfolded. The Zvak were a formidable force, and the humans had barely scratched the surface of the war. Yet they stood united, unwavering in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a sight the observer had never expected to witness. But as the humans continued their preparations, a troubling thought gnawed at the observer. There were whispers among the human command, hushed conversations that the observer could barely hear. Something was wrong. There was a sense of unease, an undercurrent of tension that the observer could feel even from across the room. Suddenly, the doors to the war room burst open. A man in military attire walked in, his face grim. He was familiar to the observer, Lieutenant James Carter, the leader of the human ground forces. But this time, there was something different in his eyes. A coldness, a look of someone who had just made a difficult decision. "Captain," Carter said, his voice low, "I need to speak with you. It's about this Zvak, about our allies." The room fell silent. Captain Stone raised an eyebrow, her gaze steady but now tinged with concern. "What about our allies, Lieutenant?" Carter hesitated, glancing around the room before lowering his voice even further. "There's been a breach. Someone's been feeding information to the Zek. We have a traitor in our midst." A chill ran through the observer. A traitor? The humans had barely begun to regroup, and now, within their own ranks, someone was betraying them to the very enemy. They were fighting. The revelation hit harder than any missile strike. The room erupted in confusion, the humans murmuring among themselves, disbelief washing over their faces. Betrayal within their own ranks was a blow they hadn't expected. Trust had been the cornerstone of their victory, and now it was shattered. "Captain." Stone's face hardened. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice quiet but commanding. Carter looked down, clearly struggling with the weight of the information. "I can't say yet. We don't know for sure. But the leak goes deep. It's higher up than we thought." The room grew tense, every soldier in the room aware of the gravity of the situation. The observer watched, their mind racing. A betrayal like this could undo everything the humans had worked for. But even in the face of such a blow, Captain Stone didn't flinch. She took a deep breath, the fire in her eyes burning brighter. "We deal with this like we deal with everything else," she said, her voice cold with determination. "We find the traitor, and we end them. Humanity doesn't bow to betrayal. Not now, not ever." The observer could see the weight of her words hanging in the air. This was more than a battle for survival. This was a battle for their very identity. Humanity had already faced so much, and now their trust had been betrayed from within. But Captain Stone wasn't about to let that define them. "We won't fall apart over this," she continued. "We'll expose whoever is responsible, and we'll use it to unite us even more. We will not let them win." The observer felt a strange sensation, a mix of awe and something else, something foreign. It was a respect they had never thought they would feel for humanity. These people, whose survival had once seemed unlikely, were not just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for their integrity, their unity. They would not let anything tear them apart. As the humans began to work on their new task, identifying the traitor in their ranks, the observer's attention turned to a new development, an unexpected alliance. A group of alien species ones, who had once been hesitant to ally with humanity, had begun to make contact. There was the Crawl, a species known for their advanced technology, and the Asolians, a peaceful race with powerful mental abilities. They had heard of humanity's victory against the Zivek and were now offering their support. It was a risk, the observer knew. But it was also an opportunity. Captain Stone, still processing the betrayal, turned to the map, her mind already working on the next steps. "We have new allies," she said, her voice steady. "We're not alone anymore. This is our chance to shift the tide." The observer watched as the humans began to reach out to their new allies, forming tentative but powerful alliances. The humans, though shaken by the betrayal, were already moving forward. They had proven they could survive the worst, but now they were beginning to understand something more: the power of unity, the strength of new alliances, and the courage to face betrayal head on. And for the first time, the observer realized that the humans might just be able to win this war, not through sheer force, but through something far more powerful. Their unbreakable spirit. As the human forces readied for the next phase of the war, the observer knew one thing for certain: Earth was no longer the underdog. It was a force to be reckoned with. The battle had only just begun, but the humans had already begun to change the course of the war. The battle for Earth. The day had come. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Earth's military forces prepared for the second wave of the Zivek invasion. The brief respite they had been given after the first battle was over. The victory had been hard-earned, but now, with the Zivek regrouping and their armies reinforcing, Earth's defenses were about to be tested again. The observer stood alongside the human forces once again, watching as the soldiers worked in sync, preparing their weapons, checking their equipment. The energy in the air was palpable. These humans, who had once seemed so small and insignificant compared to the mighty Zvak, were now a united force. Their earlier vulnerability was gone. Now, they stood together, stronger than ever before. The human leader, Captain Elena Stone, stood at the front of the command center. Her voice rang out clearly as she addressed her team. "This is it. We either win or we fall, but we fight to the last breath. Humanity doesn't give up. We'll show them what Earth is made of." The observer watched with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Despite the overwhelming odds, these humans who had once seemed so fragile were now ready to face a threat that could obliterate entire worlds. The Zvak were not just invaders. They were conquerors, accustomed to taking planets by force. Yet humanity's resolve was unshakable. The observer had learned that Earth's strength wasn't in its technology or its military power. It was in its people, their unity, their will to survive, and their refusal to be broken. The sky outside the command center darkened as the Zivak fleet approached, their massive ships blotting out the stars. It was a display of power, a terrifying reminder of the force the humans were up against. Yet, as the observer looked to Captain Stone, they saw no fear in her eyes, only determination. "Lieutenant Carter, status report," Captain Stone demanded, her voice steady. The lieutenant quickly tapped a series of controls, and a holographic display popped up in the center of the room, showing the enemy ships' positions. The Zivak were closing in, their ships lined up in formation, ready to strike. But this time, the humans weren't going to wait for the enemy to land. They were going to meet them head-on. "We've mobilized all available forces," Carter replied. "Our allies are in position. We've got the crawl tech ready, and the aliens have linked their telepathic abilities to our defense grid. We've got the edge, but we need to act fast." Captain Stone nodded, her eyes narrowing. "We'll strike first. Deploy all forces to the Eastern Front. We'll catch them by surprise." The observer felt a surge of admiration for the humans. In the face of overwhelming firepower, they didn't retreat. They didn't hesitate. They took the fight to their enemies. This was the essence of humanity's strength. Their refusal to give up, their relentless will to protect their home, and their ability to adapt and overcome. A battle began in a blur of noise and motion. Ships from Earth, equipped with the Krall's advanced energy shields and weapons, surged into the sky, firing in perfect synchronization. The Zivek responded in kind, their ships unleashing waves of energy, but the humans were ready. They had studied their enemy, anticipated their moves, and turned the tide of battle with each precise strike. The observers stood on the sidelines, their heart racing as they watched humanity's defenses come to life. Missiles flew through the air, energy beams collided with shields, and explosions rocked the sky. The Zivek fleet, though massive, was not prepared for the humans' tactical brilliance. Earth's forces fought with a kind of unity and determination that only came from the will to survive. In the command center, Captain Stone remained calm, her eyes focused on the battlefield. She gave orders, and the soldiers obeyed without question. The Zvak commander Voker had underestimated the humans, and now he was learning the hard way. "Status on this Zvak flagship?" Captain Stone asked, her voice unwavering. "We're getting through their shields," Carter replied. "The Solians are coordinating their psychic strikes with our missiles. We've breached their defenses. It's vulnerable." "Now," Captain Stone ordered, a cold fire in her eyes, "prepare the final assault. We take down their flagship." The final push came swiftly. Human fighters, supported by the powerful alien technology, launched a coordinated attack on this Zvak flagship. With each passing second, Earth's forces closed in, their weapons unleashing precise energy blasts that tore through the Zivek's last line of defense. The observer stood in awe as they watched the Zvak flagship take hit after hit. The humans weren't just surviving anymore. They were winning. They were turning the tide of this war. Then the flagship began to break apart. The Zivak had underestimated humanity's ingenuity, and now they were paying the price. With one final decisive strike, the human fleet tore through the heart of the flagship. The ship exploded in a fiery blaze, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The remaining Zvak ships, seeing their command ship destroyed, began to retreat. But the humans weren't finished yet. With a unified roar, the Earth forces pursued, launching a final attack to ensure the Zeok would never return. In the war room, the humans erupted in cheers as they watched the last of the Zivek forces retreat into the void of space. The battle was over. Earth had won. The observer, still processing the chaos of the battle, felt a strange mix of emotions. They had come to Earth expecting to witness a weak and fragile species, easy to conquer, easy to observe. Instead, they had witnessed the indomitable spirit of humanity. These humans were not just survivors. They were warriors, unyielding in the face of destruction. And in that moment, the observer realized something they hadn't anticipated. Earth was no longer the underdog. Humanity had proven itself as a force to be reckoned with. Captain Stone stood at the front of the room, her face still set in a stern expression, but now there was a glimmer of something else, relief, pride, and victory. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "But this isn't over. We've won the battle, but the war is still ahead." The observer could only nod, their thoughts echoing in the silence of the room. Humanity had faced true terror, and they had triumphed. The fight was far from over. But if there was one thing the observer now knew, it was this: humanity would never go down without a fight. The revelation, the smoke of the battlefield still hung in the air. The vast sky, once dark with the shadows of Zvak ships, was now clear, with only scattered remnants of debris floating in the silence. The war had taken a turn, but it was far from over. Humanity had struck a massive blow to the Zvak Empire, but even as they celebrated their victory, a deeper truth loomed just beyond the horizon. The observer watched as the human forces, despite their victory, moved with deliberate urgency. They were gathering information, assessing the damage, and preparing for whatever came next. Captain Elena Stone, ever the leader, had not allowed herself to relax for even a moment. She understood that the Zvak were not easily defeated. They had underestimated Earth once, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. In the command center, Captain Stone stood in front of a large holographic map, fingers tapping steadily. On the console, her brow furrowed as she studied the data. "We've made progress, but we need to find out what else they're hiding," she said, her voice sharp. Lieutenant Carter, standing by her side, nodded. "There's more to this." "More than we know, Captain. We've only scratched the surface." The observer, feeling the weight of the moment, couldn't help but agree. The Ziak had been relentless, but there was something about their retreat that didn't sit right. The Zivik commander Voker had been arrogant, sure, but the way he had fought didn't seem like the final act of a conquest. He had known something the humans didn't, something the observer had yet to uncover. A voice interrupted the observer's thoughts. "We're receiving another transmission," one of the technicians said, his voice tinged with surprise. The screen flickered, and a new figure appeared. The transmission was garbled, but there was no mistaking the message. It was from an ally, one that humanity hadn't expected to hear from. "Who is this?" Captain Stone asked, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying her curiosity. The figure on the screen was unfamiliar. They were humanoid, their features sharp, almost too perfect, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Their skin shimmered with an iridescent hue, as if reflecting light from a source not visible to the human eye. Their voice, when it came, was calm, but laden with gravity. "I am Alith, emissary of the Shavari," the figure said. "I come with a warning. The Zvak are not your true enemy." The room fell silent. The humans, still reeling from their recent victory, exchanged confused glances. The Shavari were an ancient species, known for their wisdom and advanced knowledge. But their contact with humanity had been sparse at best. They were rumored to be more interested in observing than in intervening. "Not our true enemy?" "Captain," Stone repeated, her tone suspicious but intrigued. "Then who is?" Elith's expression remained unchanged. The Zvak were merely a pawn in a much larger game. "You've fought them well, but the true power behind the Zvak lies within the shadows, the Reapers." The name struck like a thunderclap. The Reapers. A name that had been whispered in ancient texts, their power known only through legend. They were a race of ancient beings, thought to be long extinct. It was said they thrived on the energy of entire civilizations, using others as tools to further their own goals. But their existence had always been questioned until now. The observer, despite their vast knowledge of alien species, felt a sudden chill run through them. They had never encountered such a race. The Reapers were a myth, a story told to scare children, but hearing it spoken aloud in such a grave context made the myth feel terrifyingly real. "The Reapers control many factions," Alith continued. "They are the ones who have been pulling the strings behind the Zvak empires. Expansion. The Ziak themselves are nothing but a tool, a means to an end. The real threat comes from the Reapers themselves. Captain Stone's gaze hardened. How do you know all this? And why come to us now? Elith's expression remained impassive. We have been watching, observing the galaxy for millennia. We knew this day would come, the day when Earth would rise up and challenge the powers that sought to subjugate it. We are not here to fight your battles, Captain. We are here to help you. But you must understand that the Zvak were never the true enemy. The Reapers are a threat to all civilizations, and they will not stop until they have consumed everything. The room fell silent again, the weight of the revelation settling over the humans. They had been fighting a war they thought they understood, only to discover that the true battle was much larger than they had ever imagined. We're in over our heads, Lieutenant Carter muttered under his breath. Captain Stone nodded, her face grim. What do you propose we do about it? Elith's eyes glowed brighter as they spoke. You must prepare. The Zvak were only a beginning. The Reapers will come for you next. They will not stop until they have eradicated every threat to their dominance. If you want to survive, you will need to be ready. The transmission flickered and cut out before anyone could respond. The room was left in stunned silence. The observer stood at the edge of the command center, taking in the humans' reactions. Some looked bewildered, others fearful. But Captain Stone didn't flinch. She was already thinking, already calculating the next steps. We've been fighting the wrong enemy, she said, her voice filled with determination. But we're not backing down now. We've made it this far. We will make it further. The observer could see the resolve in her eyes. The humans had faced unimaginable odds, and now they were about to face something even worse. But if there was one thing they had proven, it was that they were capable of far more than anyone had ever expected. The war was no longer just about Earth. It was about the survival of the galaxy itself. And humanity was ready to fight. Humanity's triumph, the war had reached its boiling point. The Reapers, the true force behind the Zvak invasion, were no longer a distant threat. They were here. Their fleet, a vast, nightmarish armada, was now hovering at the edge of the solar system. Their ships dark and ominous, each one a harbinger of death. The stakes had never been higher. Earth, the last bastion of humanity, stood as the final obstacle to the Reapers' goal of universal domination. In the heart of Earth's command center. The atmosphere was electric with a mix of fear and resolve. Captain Elena Stone stood before the holographic map, her expression hard as stone. The Zvak had fallen, but the real battle was yet to come. The Reapers were coming, and this time there would be no second chances. Status report. Captain Stone commanded, her voice steady but filled with the weight of leadership. Lieutenant Carter, now standing beside her, spoke quickly. The fleet's ready. We've reinforced all defenses with Crawl energy shields, and the Yasolians are linking their telepathic network to our communications. We're prepared for anything. And the Reapers? Captain Stone asked, though she already knew the answer. We've had contact, Carter said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. They're sending a message, a warning. A chill ran through the room. The Reapers didn't give warnings. They didn't need to. The screen in front of them flickered to life, and a figure appeared, a tall, ethereal being, their face hidden in the shadows. Their voice was like the sound of grinding stone, deep and resonating. This is your final warning, humans, the voice boomed. The Reapers are inevitable. Resistance is futile. Surrender, and your world will be spared. The message cut off abruptly, leaving only the echo of the Reaper's voice in the room. The observer, still standing in the background, felt the weight of their decision hanging in the air. Humanity was facing the greatest threat it had ever encountered, and yet the humans didn't cower. They didn't flinch. Captain Stone's eyes narrowed. They think we'll surrender? Let's show them what happens when humans are pushed. to the brink. A wave of determination rippled through the command center. Earth had been the target of countless invasions, but this time it wasn't just about survival. It was about something much more. It was about proving that humanity, despite all its flaws, would never back down. That they would fight not only for themselves, but for the freedom of every species in the galaxy. The final battle began in the cold vastness of space, as Earth's fleet, joined by their newfound allies, the Kraw, Isolians, and other species, who had once hesitated, rushed forward to face the Reapers head-on. The human ships, though smaller and less technologically advanced, were fierce, moving with precision and unity. They knew that this wasn't just a battle for Earth. It was a battle for the future of all civilizations. They had to win, or they would all fall. The first wave of Reaper ships loomed like a shadow in the distance, their immense size dwarfing the human fleet. The sheer power of their weapons could obliterate entire planets, but Earth's forces didn't hesitate. They engaged the Reapers with everything they had. Missiles shot through the black sky, energy beams collided with shields, and explosions lit up the darkness like stars being born.